like just to remind you all at the beginning that we are in the presence of our classmates, of a number of parents and guests, your teachers, and especially we're in the presence of God. For those that I have not yet met, my name is Robert Brown. I'm the head of the English department here at Rice. And one of the great privileges that goes with that each year is welcoming everyone to Poetry Out Loud. On behalf of the Vermont Arts Council, on behalf of the Vermont Arts Council, the Poetry Foundation, the English department, the school, welcome to the show. It begins in the fall, as you all know. Students in every English class got the awesome assignment to memorize a poem, a whole poem, to recite it out loud in front of the class for a grade. And you all survived. Afterwards, we English teachers got together and we chose the best, the brightest, the most promising, the reciters who we thought had a chance to represent us as Rice at the next level. Now, Poetry Out Loud is one of my absolutely favorite things here. After all, I'm an English teacher and it goes with the territory. English teachers are usually great admirers of poetry, and I'm no exception. For those who have not yet got the message and haven't yet seen the light, what's this poetry stuff anyway? The English poet Percy Shelley wrote a memorable essay in 1831. It's called A Defense of Poetry. And he called poetry a sword of lightning, ever unsheathed, which consumes the scabbard that would contain it. Sounds pretty dramatic for a definition, but then again, so was Shelley. More simply, Robert Frost, Vermont's first state poet laureate, he said simply that a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. Emily Dickinson, that reclusive genius poet from Amherst, Massachusetts, once wrote, "If I physically feel as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that's poetry." And Dylan Thomas, the Welshman, claimed that poetry is when in a poem makes you laugh, cry, prickle, be silent, makes your toenails twinkle, makes you want to do this or that or nothing. It makes you know that you are alone in the unknown world, that your bliss and suffering is forever shared and forever all your own. You can pull all that together into one idea. That's just a sense of poetry. Poetry Out Loud is a national competition. It encourages students in grades 9 through 12 to explore great poetry through memorization and recitation. There's more to the competition than that, but that's it in a nutshell. It requires 3 elements. It requires some great poetry. It requires some very brave, very insightful, and inspired young people, 16, who are sitting next to me. And it also requires an audience, that's you. 400 people who, or more, pretty much the entire student body, who have already participated in this program. Now, the winner of today's competition will go on to compete in the Vermont Regionals next month. State championship is March 16th. The state champion will follow, hopefully, in the footsteps of our own Maggie Fitzgerald, alumna from last year, our Vermont state champion who went on and represented Vermont in DC last year. I love that state trophy. I want another. Well, let's get down to it. We have 16 fabulous recitations, and we'll bring them on to you now one by one. I ask you to give them each your full, your complete, your most supportive focus, to turn away from everything else for a moment and let their words carry you. Our first recitation will be by Maddie Houston.
The Kiss by Robert Graves. Are you shaken? Are you stirred by a whisper of love, spellbound to a word? Does time cease to move till her calm gray eye expands to a sky and the clouds of her hair like storms go by? Then the lips that you have kissed turn to frost and fire, and a white steaming mist obscures desire. So back to their birth, fade, water, air, earth, as the first power moves over void and earth. Is that love? No, but death, a passion, a shout, the deepened breath, the breath roaring out. And once that is flown, you must lie alone, without hope, without life, poor flesh, sad bone.
It falls to me to provide a little bit of filler while our judges do their part, filling in their score sheets. The judging for today's competition is being performed ably by my colleagues in the English department, Mr. TJ Matarazzo, Mr. Hunter Haig, Mrs. Erin Tinty, Mrs. Mary making sure that everything adds up from the math department, Mr. Paul DeFalco. They do the hard work, so I won't have to. Our next recitation will be by Solange Boucher.
The Bookshelf of the God of Infinite Space by Geoffrey Skinner. You would expect an uncountable number, acres and acres of books in rows like wheat or gold bullion, or that the words just appear in the mind like banner headlines. In fact, there is one shelf holding a modest number, 10 or 12 volumes. No dust jackets because no dust. Covers made of gold or skin or golden skin or creosote or rain-soaked macadame or some mix of salt and glass. You turn a page and mountains rise. Clouds drawn by children bubble in the sky. You are 20 again, trying to read a map dissolving in your hands. I say you and mean me. Say God and mean librarian, who, after long research, offers you a glass of water and an apple. You, grateful to discover your name, a footnote in that book.
It's possible that as the morning wears on, you may hear recitations of poems that some of you may have prepared for presentation in your Poetry Out Loud experience. Geoffrey Skinner, the author of Solange's poems, alive and well. We have a lot of living poets, not too many dead folks in this catalog today. He's teaching at the University of Louisville. That's Louisville, not Louisville, for those who pay close attention to such regional things as that. He also writes plays, and this I found interesting on his personal website. He lists himself as an eschatologist. A little bit of a nod there from our university brethren here. It's either a gentle joke placed on the internet to tickle the fancy of people who like big words, or maybe a way of telling the world that the end is near. I'm not quite sure which. In any case, he's interested in it. I refer you to Dr. J for further discussion of just what it means to be an eschatologist. With that, let's move forward. Our next recitation will be by Abby Jones.
Please Don't, by Tony Hoagland. Tell the flowers, they think the sun loves them. The grass is under the same simple-minded impression about the rain, the fog, the dew. And when the wind blows, it feels so good they lose control of themselves and swamp toggle wildly around, bumping accidentally into their slender neighbors. Forgetful little lotus eaters. Solar-powered hydroholics drawing nourishment up through stems into their thin green skin. High on the expensive chemistry of mitochondrial explosion, believing that the dirt loves them. The night, the stars, reaching down a little deeper with their pale albino roots. All Dizzy Gillespie with the utter sufficiency of everything. They don't imagine lawnmowers, the four stomachs of the cow, or human beings with boots who stop to marvel at their exquisite flexibility and color. They persist in their soft-headed hallucination of happiness. But please don't mention it. Not yet. Tell me, what would you possibly gain from being right?
I don't have a lot of notes on poet Tony Hoagland other than to say he's alive and well and he has a day job. You have to realize that if you want to become a poet, and I hope that many of you will become poets, that it's not something that you can make a living at. So most of the poets whose work we listen to here have other jobs. In the case of Tony Hoagland, he's a teacher of creative writing at the University of Houston. It's an honest way to make a living while doing his art, which is the writing of poetry. Our next recitation is by Isabel Rossi.
Dear Reader, by Rita Mae Reese. You have forgotten it all. You have forgotten your name, where you lived, who you loved, why. I am simply your nurse, terse and unlovely. I point to things and remind you what they are. Chair, book, daughter, soup. And when we are alone, I tell you what lies in each direction. This way is death, and this way after a longer walk is death. And that way is death, but you won't see it until it is right in front of you. Once, after your niece had been to visit you, and I said something about how you must love her, or she must love you, or something useless like that, you gripped my forearm in your terrible swift hand and said, "She is everything." You gave me a shake, everything to me. And then you fell back into the well, deep in the well of everything, and I stand at the edge and call, chair, book, daughter, soup.
Isabel's chosen poet, Rita Mae Reese, sounds like somebody that I would enjoy meeting. She's another live and working poet. By all accounts, she's one of those people who takes no prisoners. She's working apparently on a project. It has a closing date of next month. It's a project in which she's drawing together a whole host of writers and illustrators trying to put together a reworking of Dante's Inferno. A Trip Through Hell, in which she has set this not in a giant pit on the other side of the world, but in a 13th century epic reset on a 68-floor building called Trump Tower. I think she'd be kind of fun to hang out with. Our next recitation is by Alex Deal.
The Bear by Susan Mitchell. Tonight, the bear comes into the orchard and, balancing on her hind legs, dances under the apple trees, hanging on to their boughs, dragging their branches down to earth. Look again, it is not the bear, but some after-image of her, like the car I once saw in the driveway after the last guest had gone. Whatever moves in the orchard, heavy, lumbering, is clear as wind. The bear is long gone. Drunk on apples, she banged over the trash cans that fall night, then skidded downstream. By now, she must be logged in for the winter, unless she is choosy. I imagine her as very choosy. Sniffing at the huge logs, pawing them, trying each one on for size, but always coming out again. Until tonight. Tonight, sap freezes under her skin. Her breath leaves white apples in the air. As she walks, she dozes, listening to the sound of axes chopping wood. Somewhere she can never catch up to, trees are falling, chips pile up like snow. When she does find it finally, the log draws her in as easily as a forest. And for a while, she continues to see, just ahead of her, the moon trapped like a salmon in the ice.
Not quite sure if this is one of those synchronicity moments, but this is the fourth poem about a bear that I've come across in the last 4 days. I don't know what to make of that. Susan Mitchell, the author of that poem, another live American poet, she's got a reputation for very vigorous and intense lyrics. In her own writing, she talks about a quality that she calls innerness. Something that demands that the reader slow down, take the time, pay attention. Innerness demands that the reader's attentiveness, be equal to the attentiveness of the poet and the attentiveness of the poem. I think it's a good lesson for all of us who read and study poetry. The idea of attentiveness. Our next recitation is by Fred Poland.
It's The Little Towns I Like by Thomas Lux. It's the little towns I like, with their little mills making ratchets and stanchions, elastic webs, spindles, you name it. I like them in New England, America particularly, providing bad jobs, good enough to live on, to live in families even. Kindergarten, church suppers, beach umbrellas, the towns are real. So fragile in their loneliness, a flood can come along, and floods have, and cut them in two, in half. There is no mayor, the town council's not prepared for this, 3 of the 4 policemen are stranded on their roofs, and it doesn't stop raining. The mountain is so thick with water that parts of it just slide down on the heifers, soggy, suicidal in the pastures below. It rains in these towns, and because there is no other way, your father gets in a rowboat so he can go to work.
Just to inject a little moment of solemnity in this, I should say that Thomas Lux, the author of that poem, passed away a few days ago. He died Sunday at the age of 70. He taught at Georgia Tech, which is perhaps not a place that you would expect and associate an endowed chair of poetry, but they have one. They aren't. His obituary, which I came across in preparing for today, noted that Lux was distinguished by a booming laugh, an arresting poetry reading, and a passion for baseball. A self-described literary oddball who threw himself into teaching while remaining a dedicated master of his craft. Thomas Lux died Sunday at 70. The internet came alive with reminiscences from those who had held him dear, who had held him in high esteem, his students and colleagues. It's good to see that he's honored today by a recitation in poetry out loud. Our next recitation will be by Wilson Capone.
Camouflaging the Chimera by Yusuf Komunyakaa. We tied branches to our helmets. We painted our faces and rifles with mud from a riverbank. Blades of grass hung from the pockets of our tiger suits. We wove ourselves into the terrain, content to be a hummingbird's target. We hugged bamboo and leaned against a breeze off the river, slow dragging with ghosts from Saigon to Bangkok, with women left in doorways reaching in from America. We aimed at dark-hearted songbirds. In our way station of shadows, rock apes tried to blow our cover, throwing stones at the sunset. Chameleons crawled our spines, changing from day to night, green to gold, gold to black. But we waited till the moon touched metal, till something almost broke inside us. VC struggled with the hillside like black silk, wrestling iron through grass. We weren't there. The river ran through our bones. Small animals took refuge against our bodies. We held our breath, ready to spring the L-shaped ambush as a world revolved under each man's eyelid.
I can't think in the last 10 years when we've had such a wonderful variety of selected poems for our finals. Born in Louisiana, raised in an atmosphere soaked in jazz and the blues, Yusuf Komunyakaa is an influential voice among 20th and 21st century American writers. His poems also hold nothing back. And he attempts to frame experiences of his own, from the shooting war in Vietnam to the cultural wars that have continued to rage here at home. Very much a contemporary voice for those who think that poetry refuses to be relevant for somebody to read. Our next recitation will be by Maya Farrow.
Respiration by Jamal Mann. A lot of it lives in the trachea, but not so much that you won't need more muscle, the diaphragm, a fist clenching at the bottom. Inhale. So many of us are breathless, Like me, kneeling to collect the pottery shards of a houseplant my elbow has nudged into oblivion. What if I sigh, and the black earth beneath me scatters like insects running from my breath? Am I God then? Am I insane because I worry about the disassembling of earth regularly? I walk more softly now, into gardens, or up the steps of old houses, with impatience stuffed in their window boxes, when it's you, standing there, with a letter, or voice, or face full of solemn news. Will you hold your breath before you knock? Thank you.
wonderful that the sponsors and the competitors of Poetry Out Loud, the sponsors put together the anthology from which you have to choose your poem. But students as well are choosing a lot of exciting, young, active poets, people at the early part of their careers, like Jamal May. If you look him up, you'll see he's from Detroit, that he's already racked up an impressive number of awards, including the Lannan Foundation Grant American Library Association's Notable Books Award, the NAACP Image Award, and probably the MVP of Young Poetry Out Loud. He's into the tension that separates opposites, the opposites of people and ideas. It's challenging stuff. We continue with our next recitation. It's by Betty Falwell.
September 1918 by Amy Lowell. This afternoon was the color of water falling through sunlight. The trees glittered with the tumbling of leaves. The sidewalks shone like alleys of dropped maple leaves. And the houses ran along them laughing out of square open windows. Under a tree in the park, two little boys, lying flat on their faces, were carefully gathering red berries to put in a pasteboard box. Someday there will be no war. Then I shall take out this afternoon and turn it in my fingers, and remark the sweet taste of it upon my palate, and note the crisp variety of its flights of leaves. Today I can only gather it and put it into my lunchbox, for I have time for nothing but the endeavor to balance myself upon a broken world.
Amy Lowell. She was a member of an incredibly aristocratic Massachusetts family. If you've ever traveled through Lowell, Massachusetts, it's that family. Mr. Hulbert can tell you far more about Lowell, Massachusetts, probably more than any person really would want to know about Lowell, Massachusetts, but Mr. Hulbert is the expert on all things Lowell. And Amy was one of that family that brought the name to that town. She's kin to two other features of English textbooks. If you run into James Russell Lowell and Robert Lowell, she's one of those Lowells. That probably doesn't move you to any great level of affinity, but if you like free verse poetry, if you don't like poetry that has to rhyme, that has to be an iambic pentameter, if you like free verse, tip your hat to Amy Lowell. She's one of the first to embrace that form in American letters. That maybe is a connection you can enjoy. Our next recitation will be by Tracy Ferguson.
Ex Machina by Linda Gregerson. When love was a question, the message arrived in the beak of a wire and plaster bird. The colorature was hardly to be believed. For flight, it took 3 stagehands, 2 on the pulleys and 1 on the flute. We thought fancy reigned like grace. Our fog machine lost in the parcel post, we improvised with smoke. The heroin dies of tuberculosis, after all. Remorse, the raw night air, any plausible tenor might cough. The passions, I take my clues from an obvious source, may be less like climatic events than we conventionalize. Though I've heard of tornadoes that break the second best glassware and leave everything else untouched. There's a finer conviction than seamlessness elicits. The Greeks knew a god by the clanking behind his descent. The heart, poor pump, protests till you think it's rusted past redemption. But there's tuning in these counterweights. Celebration's assembled voice.
I am so incredibly impressed by the recitations that come to the finals of Poetry Out Loud. But I'm also incredibly impressed as I sit on this side of the mic and look up into the bleachers and see you guys are doing a terrific job of supporting your classmates, and you deserve a round of applause for that. To me, it's one of those hallmarks of things that make rice, rice. At this point, I want to kind of give you a little bit of a break, because sitting on bleachers is not the most comfortable thing unless there's somebody shooting baskets. I'd like to ask you to stand up and stretch for about 30 seconds before we get back.
Perfect. No mistakes. You all ended up perfect.
Really?
Oh, that felt good.
I'm not.
I had to count my fingers.
I have to count too.
That
Get some
felt
3, 4s, and 7s. Throwing that 7, I'm like,
Let's take a seat again.
no, but I don't want to. He told me the 7.
Looking down at Mr. Matarazzo, I feel your pain, my friend. We are fellow sufferers of the back, and I know that this is difficult. We are around the clubhouse turn at this point in the lineup. We have just a few more recitations to go. If you're wondering what Mr. Matarazzo and his colleagues are doing while I fill with these moments, these gems of biographical information, they are rating each performance on the basis of physical presence, voice and articulation, dramatic appropriateness, apparent level of understanding, and overall performance. And they're doing all of these ratings in the space of about 20 seconds, marking it on a score sheet and passing it down the line. Mrs. Miller has been listening to each performance with a most precise ear, keeping track of the accuracy of each recitation. Daunting tasks all, and again, I very much appreciate your doing this. I know it's difficult to do. We resume our recitations now. Let's welcome our next reciters, Ryan Johnson.
The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy. Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have sat us down to wet right many a nipperkin. But ranged as infantry, and staring face to face, I shot at him as he at me, and killed him in his place. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so my foe, of course he was. That's clear enough. Although he thought he'd list perhaps, offhand like, just as I was out of work, had sold his traps, no other reason why. Yes, quaint and curious warriors, you shoot a fellow down. You treat if met where any bar is, or help to half a crown.
Ryan wouldn't have known that's one of my favorite poems. If you've endured late British literature with me, or AP English Lit for that matter, you know that I can kind of go off on that one. Hardy is interesting because he's both a novelist and a poet. His career spanned the late Victorian, Edwardian, post-World War I periods. His characters tend to be really tragic. Don't read Hardy if you're looking for fun. Mostly, his characters struggle because they can't adapt to modern life. His poems often walk an ironic line between optimism and realism, and my lecture notes on Hardy say you could tell that he's often tempted to hope. while seeing all around him the near certainty of what he saw as despair. That's kind of the bleak picture of Thomas Hardy. Our next recitation will be by Jack Lyons.
Icebound by Walter Barton. Sky's gray sheet spreads icy rain. Through the night we heard the branches cracking. Now they bend with the bowed ache of apostrophes. Backs to the window, sitting on the couch, we listen as the radio announces the list of schools closed. An hour earlier, I inched my way along the road, tires spinning toward the ditch. Now, I read aloud to a teenage daughter who tolerates my foolishness, my claim that Lao Tzu traversed a more slippery world. With 2 books open on my lap, 1 in my hand, 2 on the floor, I'm surrounded by imperfect translations, a gathering chaos, something mysteriously formed, without beginning, without end, formless and perfect. She responds, "Sure, I knew that. So what?" I persist. That existed before the heavens and the earth, before the universe was born. She's ready to go upstairs and listen to the radio. I ask, what was her face before her parents were born? She answers, nothing. I ask again. She says it again. Where are the angels, knights on humble knees, the psalms of faith, the saints of daylight? She walks out of the room. I'm surrounded by thin books. How pointless to go anywhere on this day, or maybe any other. But then the time comes when there is no other way but to stand firm on ice.
A lot of poets are studies in contradiction, and Walter Bargan, Jack's chosen poet, is no exception. Some people may not be aware of this, but Wallace Stevens, the American Imagist poet, by day worked at the Hartford Insurance Company. He was a lawyer. And most of his colleagues at the insurance company had no idea that he was a leading American poet. The poet William Carlos Williams was a pediatrician. Some of his poems were written on prescription blanks in between patients. But I think Walt Bargan has got them beat. He was both a poet and a construction worker. He was a man of contradiction. He was born of a German mother and an American father. He spent most of his childhood going back and forth before he settled in Missouri. Again, kind of a life of contradiction. Our next recitation is by Marianne Poland.
Quite Frankly, by Mark Halliday. They got old. They got old and died. But first, they composed plangent depictions of how much they lost and how much cared about losing. Meantime, their hair got thin and more thin as their shoulders went slumpy. But not before the photo albums got arranged by them. Arranged with a niftiness. Not just 2 or 3, but 18 photo albums. Yes, 18 eventually. 18 albums proving the beauty of them, and not someone else. Them and their relations and friends, incontrovertible. Playing croquet in that Bloomington yard. Floating on those comic inflatables at Dow Lake. Giggling at the Dairy Queen, waltzing at the wedding. Building a Lego palace on the porch. Holding the baby beside the rental truck. Leaning on the Hemingway statue at Pamplona, discussing the eternity of art in that Sardinian restaurant. Yes. And so quite frankly, at the end of the day, they got old and died, sure.
But quite frankly, how much does that matter in view of the 18 photo albums, big ones, 13 inches by 12 inches, each full of such undeniable beauty?
I'm fond of reminding my students that Rice has a remarkably proud tradition in American verse. We have some fairly significant American poets among our alumni. And you won't see their banners here in the gym, but you'll find their books at Barnes & Noble. I like to brag on them. They include novelist and poet Maria Hummel, and poet and critic Dan Chazon. And here's the connection. Mark Halliday, the poet, the author of Mary Ann's poem, has a couple of little points of coincidence with Dan Chazon, class of '89 from Rice. Both of them studied with a leading 20th century poet and critic named Frank Bidart. Both taught at Wellesley. Dan is still there. It's coincidental, of course, but one likes to make connections like this when you can, so there you are. Our next recitation will be by Dina John.
I Saw in the Front Yard by Gwendolyn Brooks. I've stayed in the front backyard for all my life. I want to peek in the back, where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of a rose. I want to go in the backyard now, and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want to have a good time today. They do some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. My mother sneers, but I say it's fine. How they don't have to go in at 8:45. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman, that George be taken to jail sooner or late. On account of last winter, he sold our back gate, but I say it's fine. Honest, I do. And I like to be a bad woman too. And strut down and wear the lace of black night and strut down the streets with paint on my face.
So glad that this morning's program had a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks, what can I say? She's got so many firsts to her name. She combines the strength of great poetry and the energy, the cultural energy of late 20th century radical thinking. But she's the first African-American author to win a Pulitzer Prize. She was the poetry consultant to the Library of Congress, also known as simply Poet Laureate of the United States, and she was the first African-American woman to hold that position. Lots of firsts, a very, very distinguished voice in American writing. Very happy to have her represented in our catalog today. Our next recitation will be by Maura Thompson.
Please Don't, by Tony Hoglan. Tell the flowers, they think the sun loves them. The grass is under the same simple-minded impression about the rain, the fog, the dew. And when the wind blows, it feels so good. They lose control of themselves and swab toggle wildly around, bumping accidentally into their slender neighbors. Forgetful, little lotus eaters, solar-powered hydropholics, drawing nourishment up through stems into their thin green skin, high on the expensive chemistry of mitochondrial explosions, believing that the dirt loves them. The night, the stars, reaching down a little deeper with their pale albino roots, all Dizzy Gillespie with the utter sufficiency of everything. They don't imagine lawnmowers, the four stomachs of a cow, or human beings with boots who stop to marvel at their exquisite flexibility and color. They persist in their soft-headed hallucinations of happiness. But please, don't mention it. Not yet. Tell me, what would you possibly gain from being right?
It's amazing we have so few duplications in the competition. This one poem by Tony Hoagland was selected by 2 finalists. You may wonder what happens when contestants have duplicate selections at the state and national level. The answer is simple: absolutely nothing. Each recitation is judged entirely on its own merits. As we go to the end of our competition, we're headed that way here. I just want to tell you a little bit about the author of the next poem, a guy named Kevin Young, and we'll hear from that poem in just a second. And I love these connections. One of the things that shows up in Kevin Young's bio is that he won the Stegner Fellowship at Stanford University. You sort of shrug and you say, okay, so matter of local interest, the Stegner Fellowship was also held, albeit about a decade later, by a Rice alumna, Maria Hummel, poet and novelist, whose work is not in the Poetry Anthology, Poetry Out Loud Anthology, but her work is in the Rice Library, and I would refer you to Mrs. Kenny for her first volume of Poetry, House and Fire, winner of the Honickman Prize for Best First Book of Poems, among other awards. Again, we make the connection where we can and look forward to having more names on that wall of fame. Our final recitation is by Katrina Moynihan.
I am trying to break your heart, like Kevin Young. I am hoping to hang your head on my wall. In shame! The slightest taxidermy thrills me. Fish forever leaping on the living room walls, paperweights made from skulls, small animals. I want to wear your smile on my sleeve and break your heart, like a horse on its leg. Weeks of being bucked off, then all at once, you're mine. Put me down. I want to call you thine, to tattoo mercy along my knuckles. I assassin down the avenue. I hope to have you forgotten by noon, to know you by your knees, palsied by prayer. Loneliness is a science. Consider the taxidermist's tender hands, trying to keep from losing skin, the bobcat grin of the living.
And there is a flurry of activity now at the judges' table. Let's offer one more round of congratulations. Not only to our 16 finalists, but to everyone who participated, and that includes you. As Shakespeare wrote, our revels now are almost ended. Next exciting moment awaits in just a moment or two. We'll announce our school champion and a runner-up. While the judges make these last tallies and Mr. DeFalco squeezes the last numbers out of his calculator, I'm going to leave you with a thought for every student who participates in Poetry Out Loud. The words that you engrave in your memory become a part of your lifetime. They are a bit of treasure that, in the words of our Rice alumnus and poet, Dan Chazon, might be, in his words, small, meaningful trinkets for the rest of us, heirlooms, something to hold a handful of material, some vessel where the otherwise always loosening self will settle. His words will stay with you even after this competition is long behind us. So again, I thank you all for your participation last fall, your incredible attention today, and I'm going to walk up there and get the news. Share it with you in a second. Oh, the excitement. Oh, the humanity. We have a tie for runner-up. I'd like to ask two of you to stand and be recognized as sharers in second place, Abby Jones and Wilson Capone. That if for any reason our winner should not be able to compete at the state level, you have to. And we will have to figure out how to divide and conquer. But for 2017, let us recognize our Poetry Out Loud champion, Tracy Ferguson. Poet Laureate Lloyd Hulbert.
Great job, you guys, absolutely. So appreciate everybody sitting, being patient, being attentive. It's an extraordinary compliment to you and what we're all about. And also, can you imagine standing up here and reciting with no notes, nothing at all, in front of 400 people? Absolutely extraordinary. I think you ought to give them another round of applause. And I've known Mr. Brown since 1985, 6, or whenever he was hired. How about a round of applause for Mr. Brown? Okay, I would like to ask the freshman class if they will just wait for a moment after everybody else leaves. So we're going to go back to first period, pick up everything. We'll go to second period, and teachers will make some adjustments to the schedule, and I'll get that out to you as quickly as I can, okay? So pick everything up, and we'll go on to